The Justice Department has finally released some of the highly anticipated Epstein files. More than 300,000 pages of documents related to the late convicted offender were made public today. They include photos, flight logs, grand jury testimony, and a lot of heavy.
What if some of the most disturbing secrets in modern celebrity culture are still hidden inside thousands of pages of government files, just waiting to be fully understood? Because right now, the release of the Epstein-related documents has once again reopened a case the world thought it already understood, but clearly doesn't. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of pages, flight logs, testimonies, emails, and heavily redacted records that still leave more questions than answers. And as investigators, journalists, and the public dig through the material, new claims and alleged insider statements are adding even more fuel to an already explosive situation. But here's the real problem: not everything being shared is confirmed. Not everything being claimed is proven. And not every name mentioned in this storm of information has been tied to verified wrongdoing. So now the internet is split between two realities. One side believes the truth is finally coming out. The other side says this is exactly how misinformation spreads, through fragments, rumors, and incomplete interpretations of complex documents. And somewhere in between all of this are the unanswered questions that refuse to disappear. What actually happened behind closed doors? What is fact and what is speculation? And why does this story keep pulling in bigger attention every time new information drops? Because the deeper you go into these files, the less simple the answers become. The Justice Department has finally released some of the highly anticipated Epstein files. More than 300,000 pages of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein have now been made public. These include flight logs, court testimony, internal records, photographs, and heavily redacted sections that still leave large gaps in the full picture. But instead of bringing clarity, this release has done something very different. It has reopened questions that were never fully answered in the first place. Because even now, after years of investigations and legal proceedings, there is still no single complete version of events that fully satisfies public curiosity or legal finality. What exists instead are fragments, pieces of information scattered across documents that do not always connect cleanly. Names appear in logs. Emails reference meetings. Statements are recorded in testimony. But large portions are blacked out and entire contexts are missing. And in those missing spaces, speculation naturally begins to grow. This is one of the biggest problems with document releases of this scale. A redacted file does not explain itself. It only shows what is allowed to be seen. And when millions of people are looking at the same incomplete material at the same time, interpretation becomes unavoidable. Almost immediately after the release, social media platforms and independent commentators began analyzing every page. Screenshots circulated online. Claims started forming around specific names, dates, and references. But what is often missing in these discussions is context. Being mentioned in a document is not the same as being accused, charged, or proven guilty of anything. Legal experts consistently remind that association inside records does not automatically equal involvement in wrongdoing. Still, that distinction often gets lost once information enters the public space. Because in high-profile cases like this, perception moves faster than verification. A partial sentence becomes a full narrative. A redacted line becomes a hidden accusation. And speculation fills every gap left by silence. One of the most debated aspects of the files is the level of redaction. Entire paragraphs are blacked out. Names are removed. Details about locations and timing are partially hidden. In many cases, readers are left with statements that feel incomplete by design. Officially, redactions are used to protect ongoing investigations, privacy rights, or sensitive information. But in the public imagination, they often create the opposite effect. Instead of reducing attention, they increase suspicion. People begin asking why certain sections are hidden, why certain names are removed, and whether the missing information changes the meaning of what remains visible. These questions do not always have simple answers, and that uncertainty becomes part of the story itself. As more people analyze the documents, older narratives surrounding the Epstein case have also resurfaced. Past flight logs, previously reported social connections, and earlier investigative reporting are being re-examined through the lens of these new releases. But experts continue to emphasize that context is essential. A name appearing in a flight log does not explain purpose, intent, or involvement. It only confirms presence on a record at a specific time. Despite that, the internet rarely operates with full context. Instead, it builds patterns from fragments. When enough fragments appear to align, theories begin to form. Some of these theories are grounded in verified records, while others rely heavily on interpretation and speculation. And over time, the line between the two can become blurred for general audiences. This is one of the reasons why the Epstein case continues to dominate public discussion even years after his death. It is not just the legal history of one individual. It has become a wider symbol of power, secrecy, and unanswered allegations connected to influential circles. Whenever cases involve high-profile individuals, private networks, and incomplete legal closure, they tend to remain active in public conversation far longer than typical investigations. Another major factor is the structure of the legal outcomes themselves. Some aspects of the case resulted in convictions and settlements, while others remain unresolved or legally limited due to various constraints. That incomplete resolution creates space for continued speculation, especially when new documents are released in phases rather than as a single complete archive. The nature of testimony also adds complexity. Testimonies included in legal files are not always straightforward evidence. They can reflect memory, perspective, or interpretation at the time they were recorded. Investigators often cross-check such statements with physical records like emails, financial data, and movement logs. But even then, contradictions can exist, and those contradictions often become focal points for public debate. As the documents circulate, the internet amplifies every detail. A single line can be isolated and shared without surrounding context. A partially visible name can be presented as confirmation of involvement. And over time, repeated sharing can turn uncertainty into perceived certainty. This cycle is not unique to this case, but it is especially intense here due to the scale and sensitivity of the subject matter. At the same time, officials and legal analysts continue to caution against drawing conclusions too quickly. The release of documents does not automatically indicate new charges or verified wrongdoing. In many cases, it is part of transparency efforts or ongoing review processes. But public perception does not always follow legal timelines. It reacts instantly to what is visible, even if what is visible is incomplete. And that is where the tension in this story comes from. There is more information available than ever before, yet certainty has not increased. In fact, for many people, uncertainty has grown stronger because more fragments now exist without full explanation. Every new release adds detail, but not always clarity. And every detail adds another layer of interpretation. So even now, the situation remains in a state of partial understanding. Enough information to raise questions, but not enough to settle them completely. And as long as that gap exists, the conversation is likely to continue evolving. Because in cases like this, what drives attention is not just what is proven, but what remains unresolved. And right now, a large part of this story still belongs to that unresolved space. Because as the Epstein files continue to be reviewed, a second wave of discussion has started forming around not just what is inside the documents, but what people believe might still be hidden behind them. This is where the story begins to shift from structured legal material into a much more unstable mix of interpretation, claims, and speculation. In recent days, attention has not only been focused on the official records released by the Department of Justice, but also on alleged insider statements being circulated through anonymous sources. These claims suggest that some individuals connected to Epstein's wider network may have provided additional private accounts to investigators, separate from what is publicly visible in the documents. However, none of these claims have been independently verified in full public record, which is why they remain part of ongoing discussion rather than confirmed fact. Despite that limitation, the internet response has been immediate. Every new claim, whether verified or not, spreads rapidly across platforms where context is often reduced to headlines and short clips. And once again, the original complexity of the legal case begins to get replaced by simplified versions of events that are easier to share but harder to verify. This is exactly why legal experts continue to stress the importance of separating documentation from interpretation. The Epstein files contain a mix of verified records, legal testimony, and heavily redacted material, but they do not automatically confirm every theory circulating online. A reference inside a file may indicate presence, communication, or association, but it does not automatically define intent or criminal involvement. That distinction is critical in understanding what these documents actually represent. At the same time, public interest continues to grow because the case itself is built around unresolved questions. Even years after Epstein's death, there are still gaps in timelines, inconsistencies in narratives, and sections of evidence that have not been fully clarified in a single public-facing conclusion. That absence of closure is one of the main reasons why every new document release attracts global attention. As discussions intensify, older controversies surrounding Epstein's social and professional connections are also being re-examined. Previously reported flight logs, meeting records, and social appearances are being pulled back into conversation, often without updated legal interpretation. But investigators consistently remind that historical association alone is not enough to determine wrongdoing. Context, timing, and corroborating evidence are essential before drawing conclusions. However, in the digital environment, those distinctions often get blurred. A single mention in a document can quickly evolve into a broader narrative online, especially when shared without explanation. Over time, repeated exposure to partial information can create the impression of certainty even when the underlying facts remain incomplete. Another important factor in the continued spread of theories is the structure of the document release itself. The Epstein files were not released as a single unified explanation, but as a large collection of separate materials. This fragmented structure naturally encourages selective reading, where individuals focus on specific sections while missing the broader context. That selective focus can unintentionally distort how the information is understood. Meanwhile, official channels have maintained that the review process is still ongoing. More documents are expected to be analyzed, and additional redactions may be reviewed in future phases, depending on legal requirements and privacy protections. This means that what has been released so far is not necessarily the final version of available information. But even with that clarification, public attention remains fixed on the possibility of missing pieces. Because in high-profile cases involving influential figures and long-running investigations, the idea of what has not been revealed yet often becomes just as powerful as what has already been disclosed. This is also why the conversation continues to expand beyond legal circles. Media commentary, independent analysis, and online discussions all contribute to shaping how the story is perceived. Each layer adds its own interpretation, and each interpretation adds further complexity to an already sensitive topic. At the center of it all is still the same core issue: the difference between confirmed record and perceived implication. One is based on legal verification, while the other is shaped by interpretation of incomplete information. And in fast-moving digital spaces, those two often merge in ways that are difficult to separate afterward. As the files continue to circulate and more analysis emerges, it becomes increasingly clear that the Epstein case is not just about one release of documents. It is about how modern information ecosystems process incomplete data, how speculation fills informational gaps, and how unresolved legal histories continue to evolve in public perception long after official proceedings slow down. For now, investigators remain focused on reviewing material, verifying context, and ensuring that conclusions are drawn based on evidence rather than assumption. But in the public space, the conversation is already moving faster than the verification process. And that gap between what is officially confirmed and what is widely believed is exactly where this story continues to exist. Because even now, after all these years and all these documents, the final picture is still not fully complete. And that gap between what is officially confirmed and what is widely believed is exactly where this story continues to exist. Because even after multiple rounds of document releases, court proceedings, and investigative reporting, the Epstein case still refuses to settle into a single clear conclusion in the public mind. Instead, it keeps shifting between what is legally documented and what is socially interpreted. And in that shifting space, the story continues to grow rather than shrink. At this stage, one of the most important realities often gets overlooked. The release of files, even when massive in scale, does not automatically equal full transparency. What the public sees is still filtered through legal redactions, privacy protections, and ongoing investigative boundaries. That means the visible record is always partial by design, not accidental. And partial records naturally leave room for questions that cannot be answered immediately. This is also why the reaction cycle keeps repeating itself. Every new batch of information creates a wave of analysis. That analysis produces new theories. Those theories then circulate online, often detached from their original legal context. And eventually, the discussion shifts again toward the next supposed reveal, continuing the loop without final resolution. Meanwhile, official investigators operate on a completely different timeline. Their focus is not on public interpretation, but on verification. Every document must be cross-checked, every reference must be validated, and every connection must meet legal standards before it can be treated as meaningful evidence. That process is slow by necessity because legal conclusions require certainty that public discussion does not. But in the absence of immediate certainty, speculation fills the space. And once speculation becomes widespread, it often takes on a life of its own. Even when later clarified or corrected, early interpretations tend to remain embedded in public memory. This is one of the defining characteristics of modern high-profile investigations. Information no longer travels in a linear path from source to conclusion. Instead, it moves in cycles, where fragments of data are constantly reinterpreted across different platforms and audiences. The Epstein files have become a clear example of this dynamic. Another factor that continues to shape the discussion is the emotional weight attached to the case itself. Because this is not just a legal archive of documents. It is tied to broader concerns about power, accountability, and the limits of legal systems when dealing with influential networks. That emotional dimension makes the story more persistent because it is no longer only about facts, but also about what people believe should be explained. At the same time, it is important to recognize that not every unanswered question implies hidden wrongdoing. In complex investigations, gaps often exist due to legal restrictions, ongoing inquiries, or lack of sufficient evidence. But in the public sphere, absence of information is frequently interpreted as intentional concealment. That difference in interpretation is one of the main reasons the case continues to generate debate. As more time passes, additional documents may still be released, and further clarifications may eventually emerge. However, it is equally possible that some aspects of the case will remain permanently unresolved due to legal limitations, destroyed evidence, or lack of corroboration. That uncertainty is part of what makes this type of investigation so difficult to fully close in the public imagination. For now, what remains clear is that the Epstein files represent a complex intersection of verified records, legal constraints, and public speculation. They contain information that is real, but not always complete. They provide insight, but not always conclusion. And they raise questions that continue to evolve as new material is examined. Ultimately, the story does not end with a final answer, because at this point, no single narrative fully contains all aspects of what has been documented, alleged, and interpreted over the years. Instead, it exists as an ongoing process of review, discussion, and reassessment. And until every remaining piece is either confirmed, clarified, or legally closed, this case will continue to exist in that uncertain space between what is known and what is still being questioned. If you've been following this case, you already know this is not something that ends with a single document drop or one headline. Every time new files come out, more questions open up than answers get closed. And that's exactly why this story is still unfolding in real time. Because the truth is, cases like this don't get understood in one sitting. They get understood piece by piece, detail by detail, as investigators continue to review evidence and the public continues to analyze what is actually confirmed versus what is being speculated online. So the real question now is simple. Where do you stand in all of this? Do you think the released Epstein files are finally bringing us closer to full transparency? Or do you feel like there is still a much bigger picture that hasn't been revealed yet? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation is far from over, and every perspective adds to how people understand this story. And if you want to stay updated as more developments come out, make sure you stay tuned, because the next wave of information could shift everything again. Until then, keep questioning, keep analyzing, and don't forget, in stories like this, what's missing is often just as important as what's already been shown.